what's going to be different about next summer and what will I learn from next summer. If next summer you're going to go on the same team and do the same type of stuff, or you're going to stay doing the type of like really low level intern work and your summer is going to look pretty much the exact same. If you're trying to optimize for learning and if you're not going to learn anything round 2, that might not be an opportunity that you want to take. Welcome back to Rerouted. We are back with another Internmaxxing video. We're outside today. It's a lovely evening. And today we're going to be talking about return offers. Essentially, how do you know if you should accept a return offer or not? We're going to start this video by talking about for another internship, if you should accept a return offer for another internship. This is something that I have experience with. This is something I've made the decision on twice at this point, so I feel pretty confident on that topic. And then we're going to talk about for a full-time job. That's something for context. I am going to be a senior in college. I'm in an internship where I need to make that decision of if I want to accept a return offer for a full-time job. So it's very relevant to my life right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the thought process that I'm using there. But for right now, like I said, we're going to get started with the for another internship. So should you go back for another internship? 90% of the time, I'm going to say no. Now let's break it down, talk about the questions you need to ask yourself and other things that need to go into your decision. So first things first is you have the easy answers. So for example, if you hated what you were doing, if you didn't like it at all, I would say no. Right now, we're in a position where we see a lot about the job market being hard, and it is hard, but we need to understand that if you're coming from an internship, if you have an internship already and you're thinking about going back for another one, you have a lot of options. If you're going to be a sophomore or a junior and you already have internship experience under your belt that's real and relevant, you're going to be in a really good position. So if you're thinking, man, I hated what I did, but I don't think I'm going to be able to find another offer. I don't think I'm going to be able to find another internship. I say have a little faith in yourself. I think you'll be able to. And I say, don't accept the internship offer. Right now, we're going to wind back a little bit. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what a timeline might look like for this all right? Because I realize that that's some good context to give. So it is, on this episode release, it is late July. Internships are probably wrapping up within the next few weeks for everyone. And it's around this time of year that return offers are going to come up as a topic. This is why we're talking about it now, but it's also really important to understand the timeline of when you might be able to expect these things, so that way you can better plan for the decisions that you're going to make. So for example, there might be some places who you know you're going to get a return offer, you've talked about this, but you don't know what exactly it's going to be in until much later. So this happened to me my first summer I was at John Deere. I got a return offer from them in mid-October, and basically I needed to tell them back by November. I don't really remember. But regardless, I had a lot of time to make this decision. I had time to shop around. I had time to look for other things. And in fact, I found something that I wanted before Deere even got back with me with a return offer, so I had to ask them to speed up the process of getting a return offer. Now, this was heavily contrasted by my second internship experience, where essentially I knew I was going to get a return offer sometime late July. And then I think they wanted me to respond to them whether or not I wanted to accept that offer by August 15th. And give or take like 2 weeks on that, but still it was too early for me. I didn't go back to either of these places, right? So it's something where you know what decision I made, and keep that in mind, as well as I give you this advice of understand that this might be a place of bias for me, right? I might be more inclined to say don't take a return offer, but this is just where I've been. So if you're in a place where they're going to give you back a return offer in October, you have a lot of time to decide this. You have a lot of time to shop around, find other things. You don't have to make a decision right now. And you shouldn't make a decision right now, because it might come where a part where you, for whatever reason, you feel like you need to get an offer decided earlier on in the recruiting season, just based on housing decisions or things like that, then now you have this time. But so then you might want to take that offer then. But now if you're in a position where if you need to hear back from August 15th, this is something that you need to start thinking about now. And you might have to make that leap without having something clearly lined up already. You might have to say, no, I don't want to come back. Or maybe even, no, I don't even want a return offer at all because I know I'm not going to come back for another internship. Then it's going to be something where you're just going to have to trust yourself to make that leap. You're going to have to trust that through your college's career fair, through perhaps some networking that you've done, that you're going to be able to find something else. All right. So that wind us back a bit, right? and pull us back to what we were talking about before I went on that tangent. That's important context to keep in mind as well, right? So I'm going to operate under the assumption that you need basically to tell them by the end of the summer if you're going to come back or not, which I don't think is the majority of places. I've got about a 50-50, right? But we're going to assume that you need to make this decision without having any other offers on the table, because it's a lot harder to do. If you can make this decision about whether or not to go back when you do have another offer on the table, you know you're at least not giving up having a job for the summer. So we're going to go forward with that, this hypothetical. It was a reality for me last summer, as I rejected an internship without having anything else lined up. That's something that could happen. But so you're going to have to trust this, right? So back to the easy answers of whether or not you should take this internship. Easy answers, if you hated it, just everything about it. You hate the people, you hate the type of work they did, you hate the company, all that type of stuff, don't take it, right? You're going to be able to find something else, 100%. I would also say, too, that there are some factors that you don't want to necessarily tie into your decision. If you really like a particular manager, or necessarily like you had like a friend that you were kind of working with, I wouldn't weight that too highly. I think this depends for everybody. For me, it's just not as important. And I've had great managers. I've had pretty much exclusively really, really good managers at this point, so I've been really fortunate in that regards. But it's something where managers can change. That's not something where you might not be going back onto that exact same team if you go back for another internship. These types of things I wouldn't necessarily weigh as heavily. Culture, in general, is still a big thing. I think especially when it's something where it comes to like the work culture, what people expect out of each other, that's something I would still consider in general. But for the individual relationships, the real, like, my best friend works on this team, I wouldn't consider that personally. So, and I would also say too, another easy answer is on the flip side, if you know you want to go back. So for example, if you know for a fact that you want to work there full time, like if this was a company that it has been your goal to work at this company since you started college, go back for another internship. If there's a clear path for you to get a full-time offer there and that's somewhere that you want to be, 100% take it. 100%. I definitely think it's worth it. I had a lot of people who at my first internship at John Deere, they knew that they wanted to work at John Deere for most of their lives. That's a company that a lot of people have a lot of affinity for. Or it's something too where at my company at Burns McDonnell, I knew a guy whose dad worked there, right? And it was something that he knew he wanted to go back there. So if you're in one of those positions, take the offer. As long as there's a clear path for you to go on to full-time, if you're not going to get screwed at the very end there and you put all this time into one company, as long as that's not the case and you can do some work to verify that, then 100% go back. So we've got the easies of whether you should go back or whether you shouldn't. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the harder parts of it. I'm going to format this in part in questions that you should ask yourself, because I don't know your situation, and it's something where unless you email me, reach out to me, DM me on LinkedIn, I can't talk with you one-on-one about this. If you're listening to this and you want to talk about this one-on-one, reach out to me. I'll help you to the best of my ability. But because I can't answer all of your questions or know everything about your situations, we're going to talk about this in terms of questions that you should ask yourself. So the biggest question is, and this goes back to the first episode of Internmaxxing, it's what are you optimizing for? Is a key element. If you're optimizing for learning, a key question that you need to ask yourself is what's going to be different about next summer and what will I learn from next summer? If next summer you're going to go on the same team and do the same type of stuff, and it's going to be something where you're going to stay doing the type of like really potentially low level intern work and your summer is going to look pretty much the exact same without any sort of clear path for advancement of sorts, then that's going to be something that you're going to want to weigh. I would say that if you're trying to optimize for learning and if you're not going to learn anything round 2, that might not be an opportunity that you want to take. If you're trying to optimize for compensation and you know that you're going to get paid really well as this intern, if you got paid really well this summer and you're going to get paid really well next summer, and that really is important to you, and you're going to continue to get paid really well if you go back on full time, if that's what you're thinking as well, then that's something that you're going to want to take in mind. If it's something where if you're trying to optimize for compensation and you don't like where it's been at, then that's also something that you need to keep in mind. It's also important as well to keep in mind not only what you're going to be making as an intern, but what you'd be making as full-time. I've seen examples where internship programs will offer less money to their interns, but offer more money to their full-time employees versus an intern program that will offer more money to their interns and less money to their full-times. I've seen that where it will be like $5 an hour difference on an intern, but then like $20,000 more difference on a full-time salary, which is really, really significant. So if you're really trying to optimize for compensation in terms of like, okay, I'm going to stick around so I get paid this much, I would also be looking for a lot more in the long term. All right, talking more about what you're optimizing for, that's a good way of frameworking this decision a little bit and what's important to you. That's important stuff. That's good to know. I want to hone in a little bit more on that question as well about what will be different about next summer if you're trying to optimize for that learning, or if you're just trying to learn a lot more, which I would argue that's a really critical thing about internships is learning. I don't think anybody would disagree with me on that, but I think it's the most important thing personally for me. Learning what you like and learning what you don't like, learning about different types of things, the tangibles, the intangibles, the work, the not the work, right? What's going to be different in the sense of what kind of work would it be? And then also as well too, is if you'd be going back to the same team or same type of work that you'd be doing before, I think is also quite critical. So for example, if you're working at a huge company and if you liked the work just fine and you're thinking, oh, I don't know, yada, yada, yada. If you go back, I would almost recommend trying to get something on a different team, something in a different field, just so that way you can still learn different things while you're still at that same place. Because when you move to a different company, you can learn all about more about the intangible things like company culture, what you'd like and what you don't like in an organization. When you stick with the same company, you can't learn that again. You can learn, maybe if you have a different manager, you can learn about what types of management styles you might like, right? You have different people that you work with, learn a little bit more about collaboration that you like and you don't like, but you're not going to be able to learn about the macro, about what's important to you or not. So if you're going to stick at the same place, I would at least, and it's once again not something that you want to be this specific type of role at this specific company, I would try to find something else. Find a different thing that you can do there. I've had this conversation in the past with recruiters, with managers. Everyone's really responsive to it. It's not something where people aren't going to say, oh man, how dare we can't move you to something else. They're going to be able to move you to something else if that's what you want. There's always people you can talk with. Hopefully you've been meeting people over the summer. You've been meeting some hiring managers from different groups. You've been meeting people at other business groups or maybe aren't hiring managers. You can connect you with hiring managers. Talk with those people and see what's possible for the next thing. The next question that I would ask yourself, if I want to stay, and that's my thought process, how much of this decision to stay is based on comfort and how much of it is based on legitimate opportunities for growth and looking out for myself in the future? This is important because the job market's scary. We want to make sure that we have jobs. We want to make sure that we have internships, right? But it's really important to make sure that we're not just grabbing it just because it's something where we know we can get it. I really do believe that, and know from seeing it with plenty of people, you're going to be able to get something. You have that first internship, you have that maybe second internship, the second or third one's going to be way easier to come by because you do have experience. And another question I ask yourself too is, why are you leaning towards something? If you're leaning towards, I don't want to stay, I don't want to be here, ask yourself why. If it's something where it's like the type of work, but you really liked the company, you really liked the organization, you like the mission, all that type of stuff, maybe have that conversation and say, okay, what's something else that I can do, right? These are things that might not be a straight disqualifier for if you want to stay or not. So now we're going to pivot away a little bit to questions that I've gotten recently, or one question I've gotten a lot recently from friends, people I know. One of the biggest questions is, if I don't go back to this internship, will I burn a bridge? No. Short answer, no. I don't think you're ever going to burn a bridge there. And if you ever will burn a bridge there, it's probably not somewhere you want to work for, right? I really would not be worried about, if I don't return to this place, there's no way I'll ever be able to go back. I really, truly believe that that's not true. And if you're working with people who are so vindictive that are saying, man, if this kid doesn't accept a return offer, we're blacklisting, he's never going to work here again. I don't think that's somewhere that you might want to work, personally. I think that if you're interested in potentially going back, if you're interested in potentially working with the same team, I think that's a conversation that you should have with a manager, perhaps with a recruiter, and see what that might look like in the future. As we know from networking, right, getting referrals, people like working with people that they know. If you've worked somewhere, I would be pretty confident that you could get an offer to go back there, genuinely. I really don't think that should be a real concern for you. You don't have it guaranteed, of course. You're going to have to still apply. But you know people. You know the person who's hiring for your role because they've hired you in the past. And odds are, if they've hired you before, and if they were going to give you an offer to come back, they'll probably do it in the future. I really don't see why anybody would say, oh, we're about to let you come back and work for us. We wanted you to come back and work for us so much that we asked you to. We gave you an offer to come back and work for us. But because you said no to that, we don't want to hire you again. I really don't see a world in which that works. And like I said, if that's the case, and if that's the people that you're working with, maybe those aren't people that you want to work with in general. That's my take, at least. But in conclusion, you're not going to burn a bridge. I really don't think you're going to burn any bridges. It's going to be all right. You could go back there in the future. You're still going to maintain some semblance of relationships, right? Maybe you reach out to the manager every so often, check in on them. Maybe they comment on your LinkedIn post from time to time, right? You're going to see this person again, perhaps. I wouldn't fret about that too much. Once again, if it's somewhere where if this is your number one priority is getting a full-time job at this place, stick around. I really don't see a reason to leave if that's your end goal, honestly. Just hang on until you can work there full-time. But if that's not necessarily the case, or even if it's just somewhere that, I like everything, I like the work that I do, I like the people, I think I'd like to work there, maybe you can try somewhere else and you might be able to go back there. And like I said, too, it's just a conversation you can have with a manager or with a recruiter. Make your intentions known to them. I would even say, too, a nice way to phrase that is you can say, hey, I really enjoyed my time here, but I think I'd like to look for other opportunities so that way I can learn more about this thing. This is somewhere that I enjoyed working. It's somewhere that I might like to come back to in the future. And I think that with this experience that I get at this internship, it would make me better at this type of role. I really can see a world in which that pans out well for you, quite honestly. When you frame it in that way of, this is me trying to gain new opportunities and I'd like to come back here stronger, that's you're focusing on them still in the way that you're communicating that. And I think you'll be in a pretty decent place if you do that, if you don't want to go back. So now that you've kind of thought about this a little bit more, and maybe you've decided, maybe you haven't, the key thing is you need to think about what you want to do next at this point. If it's something where you're doing X and you want to do Y, there are two really good options here. One is see if you can do Y in the company that you're already at. See if you can get an offer for that thing, right? I still think it's not the worst idea to try to go to a different company to experience more of a different culture, different company, all that yada, yada, yada. If you're in a position where you have a job offer to do something that you want to do, you're really coming to the table for other internships from a real place of strength. And also as well too, you'll know that at the end of the day, you're going to be able to do what you want to do, which is awesome, right? So if you're doing, we'll say manufacturing at a company, you're a manufacturing engineer at a car company, and you really want to do engine design work. One, there are only so many companies in the world who do engine design. You know that. So you know exactly who to target. And you also know, too, what kind of experience you can communicate to them that you've had in the past. But getting ahead of myself here, if you know you want to do engine design, you've been a manufacturing engineer, that's a conversation you want to have with your manager as soon as possible. We're late season right now. You need to have that conversation now. If you don't already know the person who does engine design at that company, you haven't failed, but you've definitely could have been taking a little bit more advantage of the opportunity, but there's still time left, right? There's still time left. You can still do it now. Just communicate that with the people who are in charge of your offer. Communicate with the people who you would be hiring you, right? I want to do engine design. What can I do to make that happen? Now try to see if you can get an offer to do engine design work. And if you can get an offer to do engine design work, that might be something you want to take fully because now you're doing the type of work that you want to do. And if you want to do engine design work and you're trying to go somewhere else, like I said, there are only so many companies that do engine design. You know exactly who they are. If you know exactly who they are, you can really focus down, niche in on the people you need to talk to who work at those companies, the types of things that you need to communicate to those companies for that. I would say that there are really the two options if you know what you want to do next. You look internally or you position yourself to be strong externally. You're phrasing your experience that you got at this past internship in a way that really accurately plays to the types of strengths that they're looking for. Right? If you're a manufacturing engineer and you want to do an engine design work, you should know exactly how an engine design engineer works with a manufacturing engineer. Because if you worked at a place that did engine design or just any product design, you know how that works. Right? These are strengths that you now have as a potential engine design engineer is your experience as a manufacturing engineer. That's going to be something that you're going to want to highlight on your resume and in your conversations that you have with recruiters, with people who work there, hiring managers, whoever. So if you know what you want to do, you're going to want to start internally. Try to get that offer for what you want to do. And if you can't, and or if you have some time to decide, look externally and try to find that role. All right, so now we're going to touch on a little bit of the full-time question. Now, if I didn't answer all the questions or talk about everything, leave a comment below. Can even do another episode on this. But now with the full-time question, it's a lot more difficult, and it's something I don't have experience with. Because internships, going back for another internships, you're still in like Candyland, honestly. You don't really have anything incredibly pressing. If you don't get an internship, it's not the end of the world for sure. If you get an internship that kind of sucks after that one that was pretty decent, it's also pretty fine. Internships you have a lot more flexibility with because it is something that it's just a lot lighter, right? Still in college and you still have more time. There's not as much as like that pressure, that stress of looking for a full-time role. So for full-time, which is something that I'm considering right now, if you're my current employer, it doesn't involve you, really, even though it might seem like it does. But there are a lot more factors that I'm thinking of, right? For one, compensation's huge. And then another thing as well is that the start of the career is something that feels very, very different than the next internship. Because when you know that there's another internship coming, you don't necessarily need to know everything that you want to do. You can just pivot really easily. An internship, you have a really nice time-bound 3 months of just trying something. And if you don't like it, you don't do it again. For full-time roles, now that's your first real experience after that. That's really where people start to care. Because you're an intern, a lot of places don't necessarily see that as incredibly real experience, especially if they don't have their interns doing a lot of really real stuff. They're not going to think that other people's interns do real stuff. So it's a little bit heavier because that's really, really starting off your career. That's now your launching point. That's now your stage one. That's whenever you go to look for somewhere else, you have that as kind of like this is what your experience is in. So I think something that's important to consider is, one, is it the type of work that you want to do? Is the day-to-day of coming into the office, doing the work, is that something that you're going to find satisfying? Is that something that you want to do? That's one massively important. I personally believe that enjoying what you do is important. It's important to me, at least. I think the half of your waking weekdays, you should spend doing something that you at least enjoy a little bit, something you can find at least some joy in. That's important to me as I'm looking to make my decision on full-time or not. Yeah, so you have to think about that. Another thing that you're going to want to think about too is that how does this position you for whatever you might want to do next, potentially? Is it something where if you find yourself in a year and you realize that, oh, this was really different from what I did in an internship, this isn't something that I really like, what do your options look like from there? Is it something where are you going to be niching yourself so hard into one thing that it's going to be really difficult for you to pivot out of it? That's something to consider. What do the exit opportunities look like from there? Is it something where it's going to set you up for success in the long run? Is it experience that's going to be valuable to other employers, regardless of what you decide to do next? There are places who notoriously have really good exit opportunities. There are industries that have this, like banking and consulting, like management consulting and investment banking. These have notoriously very, very good exit opportunities. There are other things as well, too, for engineers. There are some companies that have better exit opportunities than others. That's 100%. You can't deny that. If you work at SpaceX for 2 years, anybody will take you, right? People associate SpaceX with really good engineering work. And if you're an engineer who worked somewhere that does really good engineering work, then any engineering place that does engineering work will think you're going to be really good at that. And that goes for everything, right? Same thing for any industry. So thinking about what could next look like. So even if you ignore externally, internally, you want to be thinking about what type of opportunities that you're going to have. Something that I've really enjoyed about the place that I'm at right now is that I see people who are 3 to 4 years into their careers, and they actually have a lot of ownership over the work that they do. They're in charge of things. That's not something that I've always seen. I've also seen too, or I've heard of other places where you'll see people 8 to 10 years into their career in roles that you could get at an entry level. That's something that for me isn't necessarily personally appealing. So you want to be thinking not only about those external exit opportunities where you could go next, but then also internally where there's room for you to grow. I think this is critical. People talk about this a lot, about the difference of startups versus big corporations, where startups you have a lot of room to kind of do everything and anything under the sun. You have a lot of room to grow. And this is true as well for some companies that really prioritize that. But that's going to look really different from maybe a really old company, right? It's going to look different everywhere you go. But these are things that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're considering whether or not you're going to stick around for full time or if you're going to try to look somewhere else. These are just questions that you need to ask yourself. If it's something where it's not that important for you to have the most exhilarating, radically changing career, and it's something where the stability is a lot more important to you, I'd personally caution you from that a little bit just because the world's changing a lot right now with AI. But If that's what's important to you, look for that, right? It comes back to what are you optimizing for? If you're optimizing for learning, maybe go to a startup, work with somewhere where you're going to have a lot of really direct mentorship. If you're optimizing for stability, maybe look for larger companies where you know that's not going to be an issue. Maybe look for different industries where that's not necessarily going to be as much of an issue. It all comes back to what you're optimizing for. You'll notice that there are some really big key differences between looking to go back for a full-time or an internship. But I think that at the end of the day, they're not that different. I think that there's, of course, a lot more stakes with looking for full-time because that's where you're starting your career. That's what's seen as your first, like, real role. It is something where that's going to be taken much more seriously than any of your internship experiences when you're looking for that next role. But at the same time, unless you're going to the military, you're not signing away years of your life for it. You can quit, you can leave, you can change, you can pivot. And it all comes back to what you're optimizing for and what you want to do for that experience. If you're looking for something comfy, find something comfy. If you're looking for something rough, if you want to work a ton, don't look for something comfy. It kind of boils down to that. At least that's what I'm thinking right now as I am making this decision actively. But in conclusion, those are my thoughts on accepting return offers for internships or for full-time. If I didn't answer something that you are wondering or you want to know a little bit more about something, leave a comment, reach out to me. You can find my email in the show notes, nick@reroutedpod.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn. You can message me there. I'm pretty sure my messages are open, so you can message me even without premium. So feel free to reach out to me. I want to be able to help out my community, and I appreciate the insights that you bring to the podcast and the show and making it grow. But this has been an episode of Rerouted, the third edition of Internmaxxing. If you have any more ideas of topics you want me to cover or people that you'd like me to bring on, reach out to me. Like I said, email down in the bio. You can reach out to me via LinkedIn as well. Links to all of our socials are there. And I hope to see you next week.